You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 84, Speaking Armenian and English. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast in conversation with multilinguals. My guest today is Meri Maroutian, an English teacher and the creator of The Non-Native Speaker. And this week, we're talking about two of her languages, Armenian and English. Meri talks to us about the advantages and disadvantages of traveling the world as she grew up, and how the different places she landed with her family shaped her view of communication. We talk about staying connected to her Armenian roots and the language, despite not having grown up in Armenia. She tells us about the many Armenians living in the diaspora and some ways that millions of them are able to keep their customs and traditions close to their hearts. And we learn some very basic Armenian phrases, including one of the cutest greetings I've ever heard. Meri is working tirelessly to help eliminate the stigma that non-native English teachers face, and we learn what she's doing to fight back and change the narrative around native speakerism. Huge thank you to Meri for this fun conversation and for all the work that you do in language. If you enjoy this episode of Speaking Tongues, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts, and like and subscribe on YouTube so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. And if you've been a longtime listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can now support the show on buymeacoffee.com. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Meri. How are you today, Meri?
Hello, Elle. I'm doing fine. Thank you very much for having me on the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm so happy to have you and have you on the show and to have this conversation. And we have a lot to talk about. So I want to jump right in and start with my usual first question, which is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
Okay, it seems like an easy question, but I have to say it isn't as easy as one might think. Because I was born in Armenia in 1986 from Armenian parents. However, even though I do speak Armenian, I don't consider it really my first language because I was like 6 years old when my parents moved to other countries. And I say that because we did move we lived in many different countries growing up. And Armenian was always, orally taught or spoken in our family. However, I never had any kind of teaching or learning specifically the Armenian language. So I never went to school in Armenia. I think I just stayed there for like a month. And really, the first memory I have of learning a language at school was when I was in Malaysia learning English. So that is the first language that I consider it my first language in any case. But Russian was in the mix as well, due to the Soviet background that Armenia has. So in Armenia there are lots of people who speak Russian as well, and most of my parents' education was also in Russian. So I heard a lot of Russian growing up, and it's another of the languages. I always say I know it passively because I never get to speak it with anyone, but growing up, we listened to a lot of like cartoons that were translated, and at that time, the dubbing was really, really particular. You didn't have all these different actors or voices. You just had one person narrating the whole story orally.
Oh, wow.
And I remember my first cartoons being in Russian, and my family, would speak Armenian at home. And then when we moved to Malaysia, I was about 8-9 years old, and I began to learn everything, start from scratch. And I did the whole, let's say, school, the beginning years of our school in English.
Okay.
So Yes. And then at 13, just to summarize all the languages that were, uh, involved, we moved to Italy. So to summarize, Armenian, Russian, a little bit of Spanish because we lived in Buenos Aires for less than a year, and then English and Italian.
This is very cosmopolitan.
I know. In fact, I do consider myself, I don't say, to sound arrogant and, to toot my own horn, but I feel like I can be considered a citizen of the world because I really feel that there's a lot of background there. And it's hard to even explain because everyone would, just look at me and say, who are you? Where do you come from? What's happening? So it's kind of strange.
So I want to ask you, with your parents being Armenian and you being born in Armenia, you moving around the world, what was their attitude toward you learning Armenian or even Russian? Like, did they encourage you to learn it? Was it something that you felt like you wanted to learn to like anchor you to them or to your heritage at all?
I'm just going to be blunt here and say that I was given no option.
Okay.
And until this day, I mean, Armenian families are quite traditional and they do want to conserve those kind of roots. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm happy that, because if I didn't have Armenian in my life, like if I didn't know how to speak Armenian, I don't think I would be as grounded to my roots as I am. Because I can relate, I can speak to other Armenians, thanks to, the audio system kind of recordings, I can communicate orally and not have to write because the Armenian alphabet is quite complex. My parents admittedly say that, they don't know it as well as they should because, as I said, they studied in Russian. And so it's kind of, today's technology allows us to communicate more fluently and easily, just orally speaking. So I think that that's something that even today, like when I speak to my parents, I often speak in Armenian to them to this day. So it wasn't an option.
It wasn't an option. No, but I love that. I love that because, you mentioned a few different places that all seem different from one another, but I think it's great that your parents didn't give you that option to lose, you're a part of you. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm happy today. I'm happy today that they chose that for me. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So as you were circling the globe and you were coming into contact with other languages, did you have an opportunity to learn, well, I'll say maybe before you were in Italy, because you've been in Italy for a while, so you have the chance to learn Italian and to speak Italian. But before that, what was your exposure like to other languages as you were in other different countries?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of exposure. I would say that my approach to learning languages was really, since it all happened, well, most of it happened before I was 13 years old. So I would say that I didn't have a very deductive approach to learning a language. I would say it was rather inductive, and I'm very tolerant to ambiguities. I'm used to being, kind of put in an environment that's totally new to me and learning things from just zero, from scratch, just starting off, and I had to do that over and over again. So in a way, I wasn't really intimidated by new languages, and I still am not to this day. And I always feel like it's just a matter of time, and I don't need to really, often I have students, I teach English obviously, so they're very kind of adamant about having to read things from books and do the exercises and have every vocabulary item explained to them. Whereas that's not my own approach. And as a good learner of languages, as I consider myself to be, I tend to get them to understand, well, obviously learner styles come into play there. But I would say that the inductive approach and, this kind of a full immersion, today's technology kind of allows for that to happen. You can be exposed to any language, really. Wherever you are in the world, it really doesn't matter anymore. So it's just like what you surround yourself with. Comes into play there. So I didn't see it as something negative. It was kind of scary, obviously, because, we had to reinvent. It wasn't like, a trip to, I don't know, the States to study English or to, it wasn't something like that. It was like, okay, we're moving. And the next day you found yourself in a different environment with, different kids who spoke a language you often didn't understand. So I don't think a lot of people have that kind of experience that's, thrown in the deep end, as to say. But I had that, and I think that made me a stronger learner, because I had to learn languages in order to thrive, to survive in a new environment.
Mm-hmm. I think what's really interesting is like you're telling your story and it's your story, right? And I listen to someone like you who's done so much traveling and especially growing up, and I'm like, I wish I had that upbringing. Like, I wish I got to travel so much. And, my parents moved around. I've been in the same place my whole life. I've been in New York City my entire life. So, that has its advantages too. But I think one thing I love about having conversations is just the idea that what I look at as like, wow, like I could listen to your story and idealize it, right? But it definitely comes with challenges. And I think that, like you said, these are the things that make you stronger. They're the things that make you who you are. And I'm just saying that for myself, like, please don't be envious of, of someone else's lifestyle, because, we all have our place in the world, and it's ours. It's our story.
But a lot of people would be envious of you living in New York City. I mean, Italians especially are so absorbed by the American culture, and they love the idea, when they think of New York, it's just, and I would love to visit too. I used to live in San Diego, so I lived there for like a year again. I was very young when that happened. So it wasn't really my choice. And don't be envious, because like I didn't have what you had, in a sense that there isn't a kind of a goal or anything you could. I was too little to decide, too young to decide where my parents were taking me in the first place. However, it's something that, like you said, has its advantages, but also disadvantages. The idea that I have no sort of childhood friends, let's put it this way, and the idea of always having to change schools. I mean, I think I counted one day, and we lived in about 17 different homes.
Wow.
I mean, you can say, wow, you had a great, I did. I'm glad that my parents and my family was very close-knit, so I didn't lose myself in the process. But it wasn't something that, I don't know, I have a young son. I don't think I would like him to have that kind of, route as to learning. But having said that, I do recognize that I was privileged. A lot of people would love to have had, crazy parents traveling the world. But it has its advantages and disadvantages, surely.
Yeah. So I want to ask about Armenian. You have an experience with Armenian through your parents, and not an experience where you lived there for a long time and, you have that kind of connection. But tell me some things, as someone with Armenian heritage, tell me some things about the language that anything that you're aware of, and maybe how you've noticed Armenian language shares any commonalities with any of the other languages that you've encountered.
Well, this is going to be a short segment, not because I don't know much, but what I do know, as Oprah Winfrey would say, what I do know for sure is that it doesn't resemble any other language. It's a language on its own. It's got an alphabet of its own. And many people ask me this, and they say, oh, is it like Russian, since everyone's in Armenia mostly, they speak Russian? Is it something like Greek, because, we kind of resemble in our traditions? And no, it has nothing to do with it. It's a very ancient alphabet. From what I know, it's got 39 letters. And even though I can't really remember them all, and I can tell you that like they have different sounds, obviously, and they have like double letters. For instance, a simple T, there would be a T and T pronunciation. A P would have a P and P. So it's like a soft one and a hard one. I wouldn't know how to explain it. And it's really complicated to get people. I wouldn't say it's an easy easy language to drill a student to talk, because the sounds are quite complex. Having said that, yeah, it's very ancient. It doesn't resemble anything. You can Google it and you'll see for yourself that it's really, really a language on its own. Okay, and that's the answer I find myself having, telling most of my students who are also curious. I can like write my name and my last name in Armenian, but just copying things down. And I kind of blame this on the fact that we don't have much exposure to this type of language. I mean, it's a lovely tradition. It's a lovely, Armenia is a very interesting country, and it has a lot to be studied and learned. And however, it's not such a spread language. It's not something that I don't have any Armenian books. I find them obviously hard to find. And I think the same, you don't do much with it. It's just that, there are 7 million Armenians around the globe, and there's only 3 million Armenian in Armenia. So naturally, I would say Armenians are a kind of nation that often finds themselves abroad, and they often do know more than one language, whether it is Russian or English. We are, I would say, a nation of language learners and speakers, because you can never find one. I've never found an Armenian who just knew one language.
Interesting.
And I do get super conscious when I have to speak to someone entirely in Armenian. I'm like, because there's always like some Russian words that come into play. And all the I would say some colors in Russian, or I would say, so it's like a mixture of the two languages quite often.
Where was the most maybe unexpected place that you met someone who also spoke Armenian?
Well, strangely, everywhere. I mean, there are big communities. There are big communities of Armenians around the world. There's a whole big community in Buenos Aires. There's a whole big community in Los Angeles. There are often, there are communities related, or that often go to a specific church, an Armenian church. We're very religious. We're Christians, one of the first nations in the world to have adopted Christianity. So it's something that, you can find Armenians everywhere. And once I'll teach you a trick to know when one, maybe you know this. How do you know when someone is Armenian? Do you know this?
I don't.
So their last name ends in IAN.
Okay.
So I'm Maroutian, or Maroutian, as the Americans would like to pronounce it. And so it's very easy to identify when someone is or isn't. First of all, like if you have a chance to read a name and a last name. However, the weirdest place I would say was during one of my, because I like to sing, I have a passion for singing, during a concert of mine. I was, performing, and then I finished a set, and then I came off stage, and there was a girl, and you would say, you don't look like any Armenians, probably because you haven't met any Armenian people, or you have, but we have distinctive features, those of, typical Armenian. And I looked at her and I was like, I think she's somewhere around where I'm from originally. And we kind of looked at each other and we said, Hayes, which means, are you Armenian? And I meet people like this. I wouldn't say all the time, but it happens very often. Like when you kind of spot someone at a distance and like, we're from the same place. It does happen. It does happen.
Yeah.
That would be the strangest one.
I would imagine that, like, and I'm glad you said that about the Armenian diaspora, because, I do know, and as you said, last names ending in IAN, I thought of one very famous Armenian celebrity we have here in the US. Family. You guys can, people,
the Kardashians.
People can put it together. And it's
absolutely,
yeah. But I think it's really so interesting to, there was a few other conversations I've had on this show, and listeners may remember, but we talked about that diaspora where there are more people living outside of the country than are living inside the country. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, how do people stay connected to their heritage? How do they stay connected to, not necessarily if they have family there, because I would imagine if you have family there, it's probably easier, because you have someone to keep in contact with. But if you're living outside of your country, like, what are some ways, and maybe maybe you don't know, but what are some ways that, um, people keep their heritage alive and keep their heritage um, around for the next generation, for their kids, for their grandkids?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I do know because when I was around 17, I kind of met my mother's side of the family. I was already 17 at that time. I had memories, I had recollections or things like that in when I was about 5, but not as many. So I met them when I was almost an adult, and I discovered like they live in Spain, for instance, some of them, and we kind of kept in touch, and I went to visit, and I did my Celta and Delta course actually in Seville in Spain, where I kind of had a chance to see how they lived and how well integrated they were. And every country and any Armenians that we as family have came in contact with, I would say that Armenians tend to surround themselves with Armenians. There are small communities everywhere, literally everywhere. There are Armenian shops or people who, there is a very big food tradition. So they tend to stick together and, find places, let's say, to meet. I personally, I do understand finding like commonalities, and but I think it's not. I mean, it's a personal opinion, so I can, everyone can decide on their own what they prefer. But I tend to integrate more in the culture that I'm in touch with, like I'm in contact with. Like I now live in Parma, Italy, and I wouldn't say I have Armenian friends. I could find them. I mean, sometimes I meet people during concerts, but I don't think that is something that I need to feel that I am, I belong, or because I feel like I'm fully integrated, and I sometimes wonder how it feels like, what it feels like to be always surrounded by, friends of the same nationality. I never had that, and I never went looking for that.
Well, I want to ask you one more thing about Armenian, because I don't want to keep you in this box, because clearly you are not a woman to be kept in a box. You are so cosmopolitan and so citizen of the world. So, but since this is a language podcast and, we are talking about languages, I would love to know, can you teach me a little Armenian?
Okay, why not?
Some few very basic things.
Basic things. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible.
Let's do three basic things.
Okay, so when you meet someone, you can say barevzes. Barevzes, which means hi to you or hello to you.
Barevzes.
Perfect. You have a good pronunciation. Very well done. If you want to know how they are, how they're feeling, you'd say vonsek.
Vonsek.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Vonsek. And there's like an informal expression to say that, but like when you want to know what's up, and it's typical Armenian, and it's inchkachka.
Oh my God, I love that. Wait.
Inchkachka. Yeah.
Oh, that is so cute. I love that.
What's up? Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Inchkachka.
So you mentioned before that you teach English, and how did that happen for you? And you said you started learning English in Malaysia.
Yeah.
What is your journey with English? What has it been like?
I went to an international school called Saiful, and Malaysia is, an ex-British colony. So not many people know it, because when I say I've studied in Malaysia, no one takes that into consideration here in Italy. They're like, oh, tell us about, San Diego when you went to America. I'm like, oh, but I learned English there. I learned English in Malaysia, really. I went to an international school. It was a very scary experience for me. Like I remember that, it was one of those private schools where you have all the uniforms and everything. And I remember going in there with normal regular clothes, and they introduced me. I went into this class full of students, and the teacher kind of looked at me and said, at that time I didn't understand anything, so blah blah blah, and I just looked at, and it was like an army in front of me of all these races and ethnicities, and I was totally at a loss for words, literally. So I remember the first day was terrible, and I cried
Oh no.
a lot, because I was like, how am I don't understand them. They don't understand me. You feel foolish. You really do. I mean, it doesn't matter how old you are. I remember that it was like traumatic, when you're saying, I envy you. Well, that was like one of those days when I was like, how can I ever, get past this? And I realized that whenever there was like, any time to do English in general, they had a special course for foreigners who were just joining the school, and they would go to special English class, and that's exactly what the name was, special English.
Oh dear.
Actually, I think that's where the whole learning and teaching thing came to me first, because I remember there was this, I don't remember the name of the professor, but I do remember he was Indian, and he was a great teacher. I actually remember, like, I feel like I can see the photocopies in front of my eyes, of doing vocabulary and learning how to tell the time. So I'm going to say something shocking here. I was at school, like, every day, obviously, studying 8 hours, but I learned English in a month. In a month. And they took me out. Yeah, they took me out of that class after a month. And they said, okay, fine, you can go with the regular kids, and you're off you go. And I was really like, my mother is very proud of that story. She's like, wow, my girl learned a language in such a short time. But actually, we had English teachers also in our family. So my grandmother on my father's side used to be an English professor. Even though she wasn't, how it is when family teaches you English. I mean, it never works out well, having a family member teach you something, like, you don't tell me that, I know better than you, and all that.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say we learned English at home with I remember that when we were living in Armenia, my mother had contacted a private English teacher who came to our house, and really for my sister, because she's much older than me, and so she wanted her to learn English. Little did she know that she'd be traveling the world. And we had a private English teacher, mostly for my sister. And yeah, she did, those usual vocabulary things for beginners. That was the only other English we had done prior to going to Malaysia and learning everything there. But yeah, the teaching, throughout my life, I would say since I came to live in Italy, and at the beginning I was in the south of Italy. By the way, Southern Italians are very welcoming, and they're just spectacular and at embracing different cultures to that of their own. So they were extremely, enthusiastic and welcoming me and telling me, you need to teach us English, and, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? I was like, I'm not a teacher. And I kept saying that until I was like 22, 23. And I was like, everyone I met would always say, wow, your English is so good. Why don't you help me with this and that? And I would always say, but I don't want to be a teacher. It's not something that I see myself doing. And yeah, I know languages, but, not because I actually studied them or I did something specific. So they would always be like, people always encouraged me to go into teaching, and I never wanted to hear any of it. I didn't like going to school. That's the truth behind everything. I really didn't like the idea of waking up early in the morning. I'm not a morning person. I thought, I can't wait to finish school. I'm not going back there. And here I am.
I tell you, I didn't hate school, but by the time I was finishing up high school, college, I was like, I've had enough. Like, enough is enough. I'm ready to like get on with my life now.
And that is never really the case afterwards. Like,
When you were learning English, and I'm leading with this question to get to your business and your your teaching, but when you were learning English, um, at different points in your life, were your teachers native English speakers, or were they people who also learned English and were now teaching the language? And what were some of the perceptions surrounding non-native English speakers, teachers?
I would say that in the international school, definitely a variety of ethnicities and races also amongst the teachers. So if you ask me what nationality they were officially, like what their passport said about them, I wouldn't know. I was too young to even care to, kind of pinpoint who was from where and what they did. I remember that in the States, I had a teacher in primary that was of, I think, Chinese origin, if I'm not mistaken. I find it oddly that in English speaking countries, it's not such a big deal as it is, let's say, in Italy or in Spain or in other places where they have like the conviction that if you are not from an English speaking country, then you can't be a teacher. It never kind of occurred to, I have a sister who lives in Ireland, for instance, in Dublin, and they have like all their teachers almost are, in the school that she works in, they're foreigners, and they don't come from a English speaking country. Mm-hmm. I find it being more of a hurdle in where I don't know other realities, so I'm just going to speak for Italy. I would say it's almost a problem here, but like growing up and in my own studies, I never perceived that there was ever, it was never the case. Mm-hmm. Of judging someone's skills based on like where they were from.
Mm-hmm. As you're living in Italy now, where do you have the opportunity to use English, to use even Armenian or any of the other languages that you speak?
I still speak Armenian to all my family, especially when we want to say something to each other. Like when we're surrounded by people who are Italian, we tend to speak in Italian, but when you want to add some comment that will be understood only by, you kind of have a secret language to go to. So it comes in handy. So definitely I would say Armenian with my family and, with the contacts that I have of, from my mother's side, from cousins and, relatives that live abroad. But I use Armenian only with them, mm-hmm. I would say. Russian, like I said, it's kind of a passive language for me, so I completely understand if I need to speak to save my life. I'm not very willing to do it, but yeah, I can definitely speak it. I found myself surprising myself at times to just having to do it and being able to. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it all came from basically input and exposure, I would say, because I never had any kind of formal training or studying the language. English I use on a daily basis, I would say, because I work with English, I teach English, I'm on social media platforms in English, and Italian, I speak English to my son as well, and in Italian I would communicate with my husband and with, all my friends, I get to use, I would say the two languages I use most are English, Italian, Armenian, in that order.
Okay. What was your experience like with learning Italian since you moved there?
Well, I was already 13, so I wouldn't say exposure was enough. Mm-hmm. And I had to kind of open grammar books. Italian is very, very complex, I think, when it comes to, the grammar. It's very complicated, and, they have a lot of tenses. I know. You are studying Italian, right?
I am.
If I'm not mistaken?
I am.
Okay. How's that working out?
I was flying high, Meri, until I decided, I could have more deeper, richer conversations if I just master el conjuntivo. And
Oh,
everybody has made that face and that sound when I say that.
yeah.
So I'm
Not many, just going to say something here. Not many native Italian speakers can teach you that either, because some natives have trouble
yeah,
using that tense.
that's what everybody has told me. What was it like for you? And did you have more success with the conjuntivo than I'm currently having?
I have to say, it was hard, but I was, again, a full immersion kind of experience as I was learning. TV is your friend. TV programs and anything like you really, really want and desire to watch and you get passionate about. So I'm a big fan of TV. And, TV programs, day shows, whatever. And I think that helped a lot because initially I didn't go to an Italian school because I didn't know the language and it was impossible. And then I had to get all my certificates in order. Like I had to prove that I had done some schooling abroad and, all that. I won't get into the boring details. But in any case, for about, I would say for a full year, I didn't go to any school. I was being homeschooled basically. And I had the TV, I had in the house in the apartment that my parents were renting at that time, we first moved to Rome. There were some English books that mainly for tourists who are visiting Italy, and they had a sort of a grammar and some words. So I would say that was the only language. Well, Spanish too, and that's another thing altogether. But that was one of the first languages I had to study. Like consciously, really applying myself and trying to learn, all the pronouns and proper conjugation of the verbs. So it was a long and troubling and it was a long process compared to all the other languages, I have to say. And until today, I would say my Italian, I've completed my university studies and everything in Italian. However, I wouldn't say I'm great at it. I still feel that like articles and subject verb agreement, fine, but the whole thing of the articles being feminine, masculine, the genders, it's really complicated. Like as you speak, you really need to pay attention to if something is feminine or masculine. I'll make an example since you're a student yourself of Italian. Like they have finestra, which is window. And, the car window, we call it a window in English all the same, right? And they say finestra for the normal window and finestrino for the car window.
Didn't know that.
So there you go. So one is feminine and one is masculine. Finestra, finestrino. So if you say something like close the window, you really need to pay attention to the pronoun that you're going to use for window, because if I say chiudilo and I mean the window, the feminine window that's actually the house, I want you to close the window, my husband will look at me and say, oh, why would you say chiudilo? It's chiudila finestra,
right?
Because feminine, right?
I always felt like the articles were the hardest part of trying to learn a gendered language,
because if I'm writing, I don't make that mistake when I'm writing, because I can see it and I'm thinking about it and I have time to reflect on it. But still, I don't tend to, like you said, it just doesn't come naturally and easily. So sometimes I do find myself making that mistake. I correct it, and when I'm angry, it doesn't help. When I get angry at something, like I make all sorts of mistakes in any language, really. So that's when the Armenian comes out.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. I always, I haven't asked anybody that question in a long time, but like, so when you're feeling like flustered or angry or upset, is Armenian is your default?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Interjections and things like that, especially like totally.
I'm only pausing because I'm really thinking about this, just how how emotion is really tied to language. And, people talk about it all the time. And I've talked about it before on the show, not in great depth, but
I could say something else here. I could add on to what was said before. I feel that your personality comes across differently as well when you're speaking in a language, right? I find that when I speak in Italian, probably because of all the dialects involved, like you would pinpoint where someone is from when they speak in Italian to you. And that kind of gives a sort of it doesn't matter if they're from the same region, like to an Italian, if someone speaks a dialect, they can kind of relate and know something about you, and that makes them more united, even though the varieties are many. I find that the fact that I speak like a neutral Italian, the kind of Italian that you would hear on TV and, in daily programs and things like that, I think that I'm more formal when I speak. So I can't sound as friendly as I would sound if I were to speak in English. And my personality, I feel, doesn't come across as who I feel I am. I always feel like I'm kind of a professor, kind of a teacher mode, when other people are just having fun and talking, their thing. No matter how, like, I know the culture very well, and I can tell you who is from where as well. If they speak in their own, I can understand it almost. But I can even say some expressions, but it's just not the same. I just don't feel like it's me. And I often get that. I mean, in fact, I'm kind of non-approachable when I'm in Italian mode. And so when I'm in English mode, I feel like my personality comes across much more, chilled out and relaxed. And so I think that that's the language I can express myself best in.
Right.
I sometimes feel also like ignorant when I need to speak to a pure Armenian, and I kind of fumble for words, and I'm like, what word can I use here, and how can I make it sound more formal, because having learned it orally, it's not the same.
Right.
And so I'm missing the vocabulary.
Yeah.
And
very interesting. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's such an interesting perspective, I think.
You're very welcome.
So I want to talk about your teaching. You teach English, and as you said, you felt reluctant to start teaching when people would approach you. But when did you get to the point where you said, all right, let's do it?
Well, desperate times call for desperate measures. I was almost forced into that as well. I started, I don't know what came, what the main idea was, how it came about. But at a certain point, I was living 1,000 kilometers away from my family. I came to Parma. They're still in the south of Italy. And I thought, I'm going to find a job and take care of myself and pay for my final year at university. And everyone was like, why would you do that? Like, why would you even? I said, well, I think it's time for me to grow up. And yeah, I have my house. I'm going to take care of myself. And I thought, okay, I know languages. What can I do? I can use it. I can be a waitress. I can be a shop assistant. I can do many things connected to languages, never considering teaching again. Because again, I had this very formal upbringing that, I had the conviction of saying, if you're not, you need to be a teacher to teach. You can't just teach. If you're not one, you need to get your formation in order. You need to have a certification. So I wasn't up for that at that stage.
Okay.
So I thought, I'm going to put my English to good use. And at that time, I think I had something like maybe 4 or 5 hours weekly, like students, just tutoring students, normally like primary or secondary students, quite young. And so I decided to apply for a job as a shop assistant in an outlet store near Parma. And after a long procedure, they selected me, and I lasted a month. I lasted a month, and as I was working there, because I was totally like depressed, thinking, props to anyone, working as a shop assistant. And I just thought, I can't. My head couldn't go. I couldn't conceive the fact that I was kind of locked in a room where I had to wait for someone to enter to kind of interact with them or to help them. And sometimes, on rainy days or whatever, I would just think, oh my God, I can't do this. to save my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a call. I had an ad on a new, like those virtual, not virtual, sorry, the on an online platform. I had put an ad as an English teacher, and I got called back, and it was a school from Bologna, which is quite near Parma, and they said, would you like to work as a teacher? And they immediately started speaking in English to me. And I replied to them in English. I was kind of hiding away in the storage room.
Been there.
And I was like, And they said, would you like a teaching position? I was like, just to be clear, I'm not a teacher. Like, I can speak, you're hearing me speak right now, but I have no idea as to how this is going to work. I have some, private students, but you can't call it a job.
Mm-hmm.
I was really honest because I was afraid, I didn't want to disappoint anyone. And then they said, sure enough, they said, why don't you come and meet us and we'll see, because we have a client where you are and you might want to go and, teach there. So I said yes. I went there, and just like that, like very quickly, they gave me the job. And I was, again, thrown into the deep end in a very big company. And I worked there for like a year and a half, and I had two other colleagues that were kind of constantly there because other people came and went. So there was the three of us, an American, a Canadian, and an Armenian.
Cool.
Yeah, and one of the teachers had a CELTA, and so I kind of leaned on her a little bit to help me out. And I had obviously the textbooks that they had given me, but I used to like learn, from the teacher books and manuals what I had to do, just not to totally fail at teaching. And I thought, well, I kind of like this. I'm going to give it a go. And I did. I got my CELTA, and later on I did get my Delta in 2018, and I got all the formation that I needed. And this year I completed my MA in languages, because initially my bachelor's degree wasn't, because I wanted to become a journalist when I came here to Parma. And so I changed that, and I had to choose two different languages. One could have been English, obviously, because it had to be spoken in the European Union, and one other. If you're studying languages in Italy, you need to choose two. And in that university, they asked for another European language. And so I had to choose yet another, which couldn't have been Italian, because everything was done in Italian, and I chose Spanish.
Okay.
And I just finished that in July, and I got my MA sorted out as well. And that will allow me to teach in secondary schools here as well.
Congratulations.
So thank you. Get your qualifications in order.
So tell us about your platform, nonnativespeaker.com, and tell us what your mission is with this platform and what you hope to do with it. And most importantly, tell us where we can find you. Yes.
Well, it's kind of new, so don't be afraid. Like when you kind of look me up, it's going to look a little empty, because I've just uploaded the first YouTube video yesterday, and the website kind of provides you with all the links, the nonnativespeaker.com. And the mission, I would say, is not only to spread the awareness, because I think that there are a lot of people who are already doing that and very well, but my intention is to actively do something about it, to do something about the misconceptions that non-native speakers, or teachers especially, have for not being good enough or not being good teachers. And I feel like the message should be that English is for everyone, and it's not like an elite group to teach or use. It's not something that is, specific to a certain group of people. Mm-hmm. It isn't. And I think that being a teacher is far more important than being randomly born anywhere in the world, because it's not like you can get a skill set out of being born in so-and-so place. Mm-hmm. So the idea that someone, can call you like they did with me and say, do you want a teaching job? Oh, I can hear you speak English well. Why don't you just... I thought that was bizarre. I still don't know how that happened. And I'm not... I don't know. I don't think that that's like a good example as to how, you go to an important company and they think that you're actually, like, you feel like an imposter. seriously, and they don't give you the formal support. And literally, what matters is that you can speak a language. That's it. But we all know that knowing a language is not the same as teaching a language.
Right.
You can have conversation.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't call it conversation classes, because classes means that there's some teaching going on. So it's something that I'm willing to, because in all these years, I've always wanted to start a kind of a platform to say that, and to, pinpoint the flaws in the system, especially here, because throughout the years, I've always had this problem, always. And it's always been, I've had to spell my name differently in order to get someone to accept me, or, you feel like you're hiding your true identity because of someone thinking, out there that an Armenian can't speak English, an Armenian can speak 5 languages. What's the point here,
Yeah.
So I think this goes beyond also the topic of teaching. It's just like your skills cannot be based on irrelevant things like your passport or the ID that you have. I mean, it's just not about that. I mean, they've made it into a sort of a thing of, native speakers, speak like a native speaker, get to a native speaker level. I mean, I get very angry thinking about it, because it's been on and on.
Yeah.
I'm tired of it. It's been I have a file on my computer that's been building up and building with these things. And I thought, okay, as soon as I get the time, I'm addressing the problem. Like, I won't, say any bad things about any particular association or institution, but I am going to say what's really happening here. And it's not fair.
Yeah.
It's absolutely not fair.
I love that you're talking about this kind of discrimination. And I think that it's something that more people should be aware of, and especially people who are outside of the quote language learning community, who just maybe throw terms around, or they're not really aware of the misnomers and the misunderstanding of the misguided goals to sound like a native and things like that. Where can we find your platform?
Well, the non-nativespeaker.com, I love that I named it that.
Perfect.
Is a platform where you can find me, you can find all the social links I have right there. And there is an Instagram page, the non-native speaker, _ after each word. So the _ non_ native _ speaker. You can find a page on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter. And on Twitter, my handle is Meri Maroutian. MERIMAROUTIAN. And now there's a YouTube page. Give me some credit. I've just begun, so I hope that I will gain some following. And if you wish to support me, please follow and give me. I'm willing to hear your stories. From the people who have experienced it, and there are plenty. The majority of people experience this.
Absolutely.
So let's share, but not only share, but do something about it,
Absolutely. I will add the links to your platform in the show notes so that people can click and find you really quickly.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for this conversation, Meri.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, I like to end each episode on the same question, a bit of a fun one. Do you have any jokes, swear words, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, or words of advice? And I will open this up to anything: Armenian, Russian, English, Italian, Spanish, that you would like to share.
I know one silly one, but it's like an alliteration, so I'm going to say it, and it's in Armenian.
Mm-hmm.
But the only thing is that you don't have to ask me for a translation because it's something so silly. I'm not going to do it.
Okay, but I will ask you to teach it to me. That's the only.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. Koshka karkaro ikanga koshki kabluka kinoim kotervets. It's like an alliteration. Ooh, good luck with that.
Okay, no. You're a teacher, so you're gonna teach it to me.
I'm going to drill it.
Break this down so that I can try.
Okay,
Something.
I'm gonna prove I'm a good teacher here. Koshkakar.
Koshkakar.
Karoi.
Karoi.
Koshkakar karoi.
Koshkakar karoi.
Ganga.
Ganga.
Yes. Okay, so we're gonna put it all together. Koshkakar karoi. Ganga.
Koshkakar karoi. Gagar.
Koshiki kabluka.
One more time.
Koshkakar karoi. Ganga. Kabluka. I love that there's a Russian word in it too, but oh my God, you're just ruining my reputation here, totally. As an Armenian, as a teacher, as everything. Okay, Koshkakar.
Koshkakar.
Karoi.
Karoi.
Ganga.
Ganga.
Koshiki.
Koshiki.
Kabluka.
Kabluka.
Kinoyum kotervets.
Kinoyu kokervets.
Kinoyum
Kinoyum
kotervets.
kokervets.
Yes, you got it.
Okay.
Can you say it all?
Gosh. Try. Please forgive me, Armenians. Please forgive me.
If they can forgive me, they'll forgive you.
Koshkakar karoi. Ganga. Koshki. Koshiki. Kablukar. Kinoyum. Kokervets.
Yeah, you got it. Study your phonemic script.
How
Study
fun.
your phonemic script.
How fun.
You can do so much with it. See, you're like a walking advertisement for this. Yeah, you got it.
Learn
You got
Armenian,
it.
friends.
Oh, yeah. Then you get to say these crazy things. Yeah.
I always like to do that because it's, especially when I started this show, and I've told this story before, but I've always struggled with confidence and speaking in front of native speakers. We just had this whole talk about native speakers, but I've always struggled with feeling confident and like feeling embarrassed and silly. And I started asking this question, and listen, it's so nerve-wracking, but if I can do it and make a fool out of myself, which I shouldn't say it like that, but if I can just take it in stride and take it as an opportunity to learn, I hope that I can inspire other people to do the same and just not feel like embarrassed,
Absolutely, because any kind of learning comes from a place of discomfort, and it's normal. You can't stay in a comfort zone and have the audacity to think you're going to improve in that thing. There's always a day one. I feel like I'm still learning today, like all the languages, and hopefully I'll get a chance to perfect my Armenian and learn the alphabet. Like I have that in it's just that when you don't use it, you lose it. So it's a thing that you need to kind of understand, that even if you're learning it passively and you have something like how can we call it? Even if you're not using it at that moment, you can always still get some input, and you can use it at a later stage in any case, right? And then the time does come though when you have to use what you already know, and it's not going to sound perfect. It's never going to sound perfect from the start, and I feel like it's so trivial, but we all suffer from the same thing. Like we're all so conscious about making mistakes, and we feel like, oh my God, we sound stupid, we sound foolish, and people are not going to think we're intelligent,
right?
Right. And it has nothing to do with intelligence. It's like literally a skill that is going to allow you to communicate more effectively with whomever you wish to communicate with, and it's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something, and you have to be tolerant of ambiguity and accept things that you don't know and use the vocabulary that you have, I find, because you can literally gesture to things and make yourself understood and the person in front of you really does not care if you know how to use a certain grammar tense. This normally isn't the point, unless you have to do an exam where you have to, kind of use but on a daily basis, it's not something you really need. Perfection is not a requirement anywhere. I feel like that's the case, and learners of languages really need to chillax a little and
exactly
give themselves a break. And I know how I did that with Spanish. I kind of immersed myself with Spanish speaking, and I had a private teacher, and I would just put myself out there. I would say things. I would try to put myself in an uncomfortable, because I had exams to prepare, and in less than a year and a half I managed to surpass past that fear and leave that fear behind of just, okay, I'm just going to speak it.
Right.
It might be full of mistakes, and my professors did comment on that. Say, oh, but your fluency, you need to work on your vocabulary, but you're fluent. Like, I could get my ideas across, and that's what mattered to me the most. And they could never fail me, because I knew the content, and I was getting my message across.
Yeah.
Good or bad,
Yeah.
That's what matters. That's what matters ultimately.
Totally. Awesome.
100%.
Well, thank you again for this conversation. I had such an amazing time chatting with you. Before I let you go, don't think about it too hard. But in this situation, when we've been talking for quite some time, what would be the best way pick a language that comes to you first? What would be the best way to say goodbye?
Stestun.
Stestun? Stestun. And that means goodbye in Armenian. Thank you so much. Stestun. Meri. Thanks again, and I'll be talking to you soon. Bye.
Perfect. Thank you for having me again. Bye-bye.